Through the My Toyota store, you can enjoy hassle-free online buying for your Toyota genuine parts and all make parts. With an electronic parts catalog containing over 400,000 Toyota genuine parts, all accessible through a model serial search so you can take the guesswork out of identifying the correct part for your equipment. Get started today at shop.toyotaforklift.com. That's shop.toyotaforklift.com. Does automation need to be that complex? Not really. In this bonus episode of the New Warehouse Live, I was joined by Drew Thomas of Onero Technologies to discuss simple automation that you can start to implement today in order to get started on a journey of transformation. If you think that automation seems complex and daunting, then this is the episode to change your mind.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
All right, here we go. We are live today with this live episode of the New Warehouse Podcast, and we're going to be talking about how automation isn't necessarily as complex as maybe it may seem from some aspects and some standpoints. And we're going to talk a little bit about some simpler forms of automation and how to kind of get your feet wet or dip your toes into the automation pool there. And I'm going to be joined by Drew Thomas. He is founder and president of Onero Technologies, which I just learned the meaning of, which is pretty interesting. And Drew, very much involved in the automation space. Big awareness spreader, I will say, if that's a term maybe, here on LinkedIn about automation things that are out there in the market from simple to complex and how he kind of addresses those and works with clients as well. So, Drew, welcome to the live here with me today. How are you, sir?
Oh, great, Kevin. Thank you for the invite with this. Happy to be here and talk about all things automation, which, as you said, I share quite a bit on LinkedIn and I love to spread the knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. You're the automation guy, I would say. I see more and more of your stuff like popping up and just growing here on LinkedIn, which has been great to see and love the videos and the accompanying insights that you post with them as well. So really interesting stuff. So why don't you kind of tell us, I guess, a little bit about you? Tell us about your background, how you got into automation, specifically on the warehouse side. What really kind of drew you into that, and where did that interest kind of start from?
Oh, yeah, certainly. My background, I would say, is pretty broad, a bit interesting. I could probably spend most of the time literally just kind of going over stuff that I've done before, but I'll try to summarize as best as possible here. From an education standpoint, I have my degree in electrical engineering and controls and then artificial intelligence before you really had computers to be able to do this stuff. So doing like computations of neural networks in college was a bit intense. And I realized, okay, I'm just going to go down the controls path coming out of there. So started my career out at Anheuser-Busch doing high-speed bottling line. I don't know if you ever saw the old Laverne and Shirley shows.
Yeah, definitely.
Where they had the beer going down the line, and I did that stuff at the beginning of my career. And so that's where I got my feet wet, was doing control systems for high-speed breweries, and got into doing that for all sorts of consumer packaged goods. So that's where I got my feet wet there. But I learned early on that there's a whole other world out there other than the electrical engineering. And I would frequently get designs from folks that I would have to try to program things around. So I took it upon myself to take over the mechanical engineering side of things, the drawings, the CAD, learn how to deal with the civil and architectural. So basically, I'm just always somebody learning about things.
Yeah.
And so that's really kind of in a nutshell who I am. to constantly always try to learn new things. I mean, one story I love to share with people is that I was at a carbonated soft drink manufacturer, and we had decommissioned a mixing skid in the parking lot. They left it out in the parking lot, and it was 115 degrees out in the middle of California. And I spent the time on my own after my shift to go out there and as built it to understand how it worked, because I wanted to understand how a mixing skid works. And it's just,
Huh.
I've always been drawn to learning everything that I can about various types of automation and technology systems. But that was before, now we've got YouTube. So I like to dub it YouTube University, because anytime I want
Yeah.
to know something, just jump on there. So
Yeah, definitely. And interesting there. I mean, and it's impressive, I guess, to see, and I can kind of see this, I think, too, in how you kind of convey the information that you do here on LinkedIn, too, is your interest in that kind of curiosity and like never ending kind of tenacity to learn more about what's going on, or how these things function and what goes behind them. And also just leading to, what does that mean actually for like the operation, or what does that mean for the end user or the warehouse operator there? So, I mean, it's very interesting to see how you go about that, and interesting to see how that kind of foundationally grew with you throughout your career, and got you to where you are now. So why don't we talk a little bit about, because, we're kind of here to talk about automation, right? But we're here to talk a little bit about maybe some of the more simpler approaches, or simpler forms to automation. And, we'll dive into that a little further. But why don't you kind of give us your overall definition of warehouse automation, and how you view that and what that means to you?
yeah, my definition, I think, might differ from some others. And that's kind of,
Mhm.
why we're here to talk about this, because automation tends to get a focus on, the more complex, just mechanical systems that have been out there, lived in the world of distribution centers for many years, and put in miles and miles of conveyor with a lot of sortation points.
Mhm.
And that's fairly complicated. The software in the background is what a lot of people tend to not think about. So automation can be very simple. I mean, honestly, we use automation every day. A lot of our lives are automated. We have calendars on our phones now. I mean,
Mhm.
we don't pull an abacus out to do calculations, right? We use a
Yeah.
calculator. So tend to think about all the tools around us as automation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. And it's a great point there when we look at like our personal lives and those things that, we utilize, like a calendar, as simple as that, or a calculator, like you said, or automating some of those things that we do, or those daily tasks we would do otherwise. But I think if we look at, the warehouse space specifically, I think oftentimes when we talk about automation, there's a lot of focus, or the mind kind of initially goes to robotics, or like you said, miles of conveyor, or something like that, where that can be more complex, or maybe daunting in a sense to think about. So I'm curious, why do you think that's the case? Like, why does the tendency kind of lean towards, when we talk about automation, we talk about some more of those like larger scale, maybe more expensive, maybe more complex solutions like robotics?
Yeah, I tend to think there's a couple of reasons for that. Historically, the automation was associated with these conveyor systems. And before warehouses, it was production facilities, like where I was at Anheuser-Busch, and the wineries that I worked in and things like that. And so it tended to be looked at as those complex types of systems. As we've transformed into the modern age, that's the robots get all the airtime, right? Because people are going and talking about humanoids right now, right? And so the robots that look like people and that can do dexterity tasks. And that's not necessarily the automation for a warehouse. It's going to move the packages around and things like that. But because it gets all the airtime, there's a lot of talk around, a lot of buzz around, artificial intelligence, AI,
Mhm.
chat GPT, that type of stuff. But when you go to the shows now, everybody sees all the robotics because that's what's moving around. I personally was not attending ProMat or Modex or those types of shows prior to the influx of robotics in that industry. I think the first one that I went to was maybe in teen, I think might have been the first one. Prior to that, I was going to a show called Pack Expo, which was really in the
Okay.
automation and the
Yeah.
consumer package. And that was all heavy duty machinery everywhere. There wasn't a whole lot of robotics in that. So I don't know. I think people tend to think of it as robotics and the complex technology because that's kind of what you see.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I think too, it's kind of almost, it's like the shiny object, right? In a sense,
It really
right?
is.
It's
Yes.
like that just stands out, and I think it's easy to market in a sense, right? Because it's cool, right? It catches people's attention, and even you just mentioned humanoid robots. I mean, like earlier this morning, I saw like GXO has put out a video around their like Q2 report, and it was focused on the humanoids, right? And like all the different humanoid applications they're using or trying to incubate over there and see how they work. But I think that it gets lost in that a little bit. And I think for, maybe the smaller mid-market SMBs, like, we start to talk about automation, that kind of their mind goes there initially, I think maybe. And they think, oh, like that's a little too scary for us, or it's too much for us to take on now, or how can we kind of, climb that mountain in a sense to get to that level. But there's a lot more simpler forms of automation out there. Like, you mentioned the simplest, I guess, the calculator, right? In that sense. But, when you look at some of these operations and you engage with customers or potential customers in a warehouse space, I mean, what are some of the simplest forms of automation that are out there that you think often get overlooked or don't get considered when we start to talk about automation and what that means for their operation?
I mean, there's a whole wide variety of things that are out there for sure. The key component when someone's operating a warehouse is to kind of look at tasks that are taking a little bit of time or are difficult to do, such as lifting up a heavy box. I mean, I recently posted about one of my favorite companies, Schmalz. They've got a vacuum lift assist device that most people aren't aware of, don't know that it exists. I got the benefit of using one, I think it was 20 years ago, to lift up kegs of beer. You feel like you're superhuman because you can lift something with one hand that weighs 40 pounds. There's various types of software that are out there that make life easy. Pick the light type of systems, help direct people on where to put the products. There's a wide variety of things. One of the simplest ones that I see people overlook a lot of times is an auto bagger, as an example. I mean, if you've got a lot of product that you're putting into mailers, you can very easily just put it in an auto bagger, low cost. It automatically labels, you drop the product in, and away it goes. And then there's some items that are, foundational to the operation as well that are simple.
We'll be back after a quick break.
When it comes to systems, you want something that will start showing results fast. You're looking for a tool that can enable your 3PL or warehouse to get to the next level. So why wait? That's why Carton Cloud provides supported, fast onboarding that can have your WMS up and running in hours, not months. Jump into Carton Cloud's easy-to-use workflows for all of your services, including cross-docking, serialized inventory tracking, e-commerce order fulfillment, and more. This software is built by logistics people for logistics people, and those logistics people are standing by to help train you and support you so that you can be successful with your customer. With 24/7 real-time reporting and free online training, you need to check out Carton Cloud for your operation. Take the next step in your operation by heading to cartoncloud.com/free-demo or click the link in the show notes.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is like so much of that out there that gets overlooked. Like, I love the vacuum lifts, like you mentioned. I mean, I think it's incredible what they can do, and some of like even the way that they've taken those vacuum lifts, and some companies have made them like mobile as well, and the flexibility there is pretty profound in how you can enable those employees and those warehouse workers to do more in their existing state as a human, I guess, and like you said, make them kind of like superhuman in a sense to be able to lift this weight that otherwise they would really struggle to do, or just not be able to lift at all. And I think it's those more simpler things that start to build some of that foundational process, right, where you're looking towards how do we make these processes better and how do we automate them in a sense, but, how do we do it almost, stepping stones or baby steps to be able to do that. So I guess what is your advice and how do you kind of go about navigating this with operations that are looking to start to improve their processes, not quite sure where to start, maybe aren't aware of some of these other types of automation solutions because they're just not as widespread or not as, I guess, attention grabbing as some of the other things like humanoids, like we talked about? I mean, how do you kind of help them navigate that and understand, like, really where should they start to begin or how should they start to look at these types of things?
Yeah, when I'm talking to someone for the first couple times about their warehouse operation, most folks tend to gravitate towards what could we do for picking.
Mm.
And that's where a lot of the automation that you see out at these shows is centered around, how fast can we pick the product to get it ready to prepare it for an order. But really, from a foundational standpoint, it comes down to how does it come into the building?
Mm.
What's your receiving process, right? Like if you're not receiving that properly against the purchase orders to reconcile that, if you aren't receiving the product and ensuring that the dimensions and weights are correct so that you've got an accurate item master, then, that's a foundational element, is having that correct information in there to be able, because it gets utilized throughout the operation. If you have correct dimensions and correct weights, then you can kind of do some additional things like help direct your slotting a little bit better to optimize your cubic utilization in the facility. You can better utilize shipping software to optimize your costs going out the door, but it kind of all starts at where that product comes in to the building. And there's some simple automation to make that easy.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting point there. And I mean, it's kind of around that data aspect, right? In a sense. And I had a recent podcast conversation with Ken over at IQ Pack talking about dimensions. I think you know him, right? And he's all over LinkedIn with his dimensions that he's preaching, right? And I think, it is such a foundational thing, right? Because I guess talk to us in that sense, because like you said, as it comes in the door, it has such a downstream impact too, whether you have those dimensions correct or not. I mean, how does that, impact from an automation perspective? Like, you start with some simple forms of automation, then you get a little more complex, a little more involved. You start doing, the mobile shelving, like I know you talk about a lot, or, even just conveyor and things of that nature. I mean, how does having like the incorrect dimensions as you start to scale these types of solutions, I mean, how does that have like a negative impact, or what kind of impact does it have on your operation? And, how much more complex, I guess, in a sense, does it make putting these solutions in place?
Yeah, great. That's not having accurate dimension has a cascading negative impact for sure. It starts with when you're in the early stages of automation, just simply being able to ship the product out the door in an efficient manner. Because a lot of these WMS systems that folks are deploying nowadays have features that help them slot the product or help them do what's called cartonization to help actually prepare the orders to go out the door in the most appropriate box. So from a simple standpoint, it has a negative impact on your shipping costs from day one. As you get more and more complicated solutions, as you get further into automation, let's just talk about like a palletizing robot, right? And so had a case recently where I was at a facility and the dimensions are wrong of the box coming in. They have automated palletizing robots, and it's designed to recognize when the dimensions were wrong on the box. So it froze. The system was stopped. They were waiting to fix the problem. The WMS was a bit old and antiquated. It took them a little while to fix that problem and get that dimension updated. And so they had to kind of do a workaround for a couple hours, and it really impacted operation. When if there's just a process of when it's coming in the door, the first time that product's coming in for that purchase order to do some sort of a quick verification, did the dimension change? Does it match what's in the item master? That has a negative impact on that. And the shelf to person systems, very similar to the slotting side of things, that it's really beneficial to do some sort of a directed put away on those systems because you have shelves of different dimensions, slots of different dimensions. And if the items that are coming in don't fit in those slots where the system expects it to, now suddenly you've got an exception. Now you've got to deal with that at the end of the shift or workarounds during it, and it makes things inefficient. So it kind of all boils down to that you have an accurate item master, then it makes life a lot easier for you as you scale.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think, that item master is such a critical part. And I think sometimes is, you're just starting out or, you don't have the most complex systems in place. It's kind of easy workarounds in a sense sometimes. And it kind of gets lost a little bit and not the importance that it needs. I mean, I know, from my personal experience on the warehouse side, I mean, I used to work for a company that was a book publisher. And then once a year we had calendars and those calendars would come in and we had a big issue because a lot of what we did was driven by product dimensions and weight. And that's how we would determine if there was a QA issue. And I was running the quality control department and distribution center at that time. And when we had calendars come in, we would just get so many rejections and so many kickoffs because it was new every year and the calendars were different. And that item master data, like you said, it was just not getting updated in time. And so, you would get like a desktop calendar, which, is probably like 18 inches wide or something like that. Somebody on the picking side would be trying to put that in a, like a 6x6 by like 8 box or something, right? It's just like hanging out and you can see it coming down the conveyor and you're just like, like somebody did not capture the right dimensions for this. And, the pickers are doing what the system's telling them to do basically, but the system is only as good as the information data that's flowing into it. So, I mean, I think that's a really great call out on, how to start and with some kind of simple solution in a sense to be able to build foundationally on that. So I mean, as you start to move inside the building, I guess, right, we get past this kind of receiving and get our data correct and all these things. What are kind of some of the next steps there potentially that people can take in this automation journey, and how do you recommend them to continue to build upon that?
Yeah. So now you talk about the receiving part of the process,
Mhm.
and then kind of again, a lot of the focus is usually around picking, but then you've got the end of the system as far as the shipping in the outbound area. And, that last 100 feet that is often inefficient. So if you go and you put a lot of automation, you spend a lot of time on optimizing, getting your orders filled, getting them packed, you're going to run into a bottleneck on that side of the system as well. And so there's easy ways. I mentioned earlier, the auto bagger, because when you're putting something into a poly bag or a paper bag that a lot of folks are using nowadays, and you get a label put on it automatically, that's simple. It reduces the time and the errors associated with that process. But simple sortation systems, that type of stuff. One of the things that I don't see very often is simple extendable conveyor that goes in and out of the trucks, right? And there's the flexible skate roller style looking conveyor is inexpensive. It's usually easy to get off the shelf. There's MDR style ones. I personally kind of have a preference for the Carter Intralogistics one because it's pretty simple and easy to deploy. But those types of things really help. You focus on the outbound shipping side, and there's print and apply labelers. So just identify where there's tasks that are slowing people down. But I mentioned earlier also pick the light system. So you don't need to have your entire operation automated, but lighted put walls to be able to direct someone on where to put the product. That's fantastic help in order to be able to do some improvements at the warehouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, seeing those things, and I think it's interesting you mentioned kind of, I guess you started with the receiving side, right? And then you kind of mentioned the outbound side too, like as, it's getting labeled, it's getting packed, it's getting into the truck to go wherever it's going to go. And you kind of, I think there's been a lot of focus, like, or at least from, it's been out there on the picking side. So it's interesting that you talked about kind of I guess the bread to that sandwich in a sense, right? Where the
I
picking's
love that.
in the
Yes.
middle. So, how do you think, because I think like you said earlier, a lot of the initial focus is like, oh, how do I automate my picking? Because, I have a lot of headcount there and just a lot of throughput going on the pick side. But you're kind of talking about, looking at both different ends of the spectrum surrounding the picking aspect. So, I mean, do you recommend that, picking is not necessarily what the primary first focus should be from like an automation perspective?
I would say it's certainly part of the conversation, but that's
Hmm.
almost always my first introductory call with a facility is going to be like, okay, tell me how your product comes in the door. Tell
Mm,
me how it goes out the door. And because it kind of all really centers around that. I mean, if you don't know what type of labels are on the boxes when they're coming in from the suppliers, if you don't know what type of labels and carriers that they're using going out the door, do they have hazardous requirements, special labels, special packing requirements? Are they dealing with Amazon FBA? And then it kind of boils back to, okay, now that you understand, those are kind of the foundation. It's all about orders out the door in the end of the day and how you get to that point. And I've seen folks make mistakes of putting in very high dollar picking goods to person, tote to person systems. And they focused on that. That was where they spent a lot of the money. And
mm,
I'm talking 20, $30 million.
yeah.
And what they did is they really moved the labor around in the facility because there's the aspect of needing to prepare the product and get it in there ready to be picked. So it's where do you stage your inventory? So it kind of all boils down to, okay, that receiving process, how many times do you have to touch the product before it's in a pickable state? Is another thing that I like to talk about, because if you have to touch it 5 or 6 times before you get it into that tote to person picking system, well, then look at ways to reduce that. Maybe that's not the right solution, which is why I do talk a lot about the shelf to person systems.
Mm.
And put them away straight into the picking location, and then the robot takes it away.
Interesting point. Yeah, I think it's interesting because you do think about some of these things and you get so focused on like one specific process. Like you don't think about these processes that happen before, happen after, and now, like you said, all of a sudden before you hit that, if it's an ASRS or whatever the case may be, now you're touching this product multiple times and you haven't really thought about, streamlining what's happening before that. And now maybe you end up with a bottleneck, or you're slowed down at some point, or after the fact, right? Maybe you've sped up like picking, but you haven't addressed your packing side, your outbound side. And now you just have like a bunch of queued up orders and you're not like keeping up with the amount that you're picking or at that rate. So I'm curious, and you had a post recently about trash conveyors, right? Which is kind of like an overlooked thing, I think you were saying. And I thought that was
Yeah.
very interesting. And, I love a good organizational trash structure
Yeah.
within a warehouse. I think I have fellow trash organizational enthusiasts in the audience too, and Joe McIntyre there as well. But,
Nice.
I think that post kind of highlights like some of those things that are maybe overlooked in a sense. So if we look at some of those things and like you're talking about, thinking about, how many touches are happening before we hit the automated solution, what are some of those things that are often most overlooked, or that you often recommend should be like in addition to a solution or added onto a solution that people don't necessarily think of right away or consider in the overall solution itself?
I think you really hit the nail on the head there when you're talking about the trash conveyor, because some of the most overlooked things at the facility are how you deal with the waste materials, other stuff, the pallets themselves, making sure that you've got the corrugate for your pack out materials in a good location and stage. Even something as simple as spare parts. Where do you actually keep that? A lot of times there's like a maintenance cage like shoved in the corner somewhere.
Mm.
But what happens when you need to get those parts? That process needs to be streamlined as well, because your system could be down if you've done automation. But on the On the corrugate removal piece, that's one that I love to talk to folks about, because so many facilities I'll go into and you'll see they're either breaking down boxes for recycling, or they've got like an old style baler in the back of the warehouse, and there's people wheeling boxes back there. And so there's a practice called 5S that,
Oh, yeah.
We lived in the production environment. That's really important. Like, everything has a place and everything in its place is basically what it boils down to. And it helps you think about those types of things. It's like, how do you deal with your recycling material? And if you've got easily accessible either bins or overhead empty corrugate, sometimes called trash conveyor, that just takes it away from the associates whenever they're doing their put away process, that's something that's really beneficial. Another often overlooked part of an overall operation that is kind of just brushed aside. Like, literally, I was doing a fully automated system a couple of years ago, and they said, just put it in the corner of the warehouse. It's dirty. We don't want to think about it. But that's the returns process.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Returns is a necessary animal to deal with in a lot of these operations. It comes in on a different truck. It's slow. It's inefficient, but it's important. If you can handle that returns as part of the overall operation and make that more efficient and include that as part of the scalable automation, then you benefit the organization greatly by doing that type of stuff. So don't ignore the returns as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard several people, and I've run a returns department before myself, and several people, there's just like kind of a understanding, I think, through the industry that like the dirtiest and worst part of the warehouse is returns. Typically is what you see, like you said, like just stacked up in a corner somewhere, because people just don't want to deal with it. But it is such a critical part, and I think it's even more critical the more we see e-commerce expansion, because some of that product that's being returned is potential additional sales that could be made, right? So, focusing on that and not forgetting that, and not, treating it like the dunce in the corner, I guess, in a sense, is certainly an important thing to do, and an important thing to look at. So I think
that's how the returns department feels. They feel like they're the dunce in the corner a lot of times, because that's where they seem to get treated.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I fought that when I was running that returns department. I fought that battle quite often, because whenever the rest of the warehouse got busy, we were like the first department where they're like, oh, we're gonna pull your employees to pick or pack or something like that. And I got in many arguments and debates about the importance of our roles there. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. As we kind of think about that, and we look at some of these things here, Drew, and, like I mentioned earlier in the conversation, you share a lot of videos, a lot of information about a lot of these solutions and things that are out there in the market. I'm curious, what solutions kind of really are capturing your attention right now? What's like really exciting for you? What do you think people should really be looking at and having on their radar?
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes.
I mean, there's a couple. I mean, obviously, we're here to talk about simple, easy solutions, and one of them kind of like borders that, because it's a way that they've simplified what used to be very, very complex. But as far as like some of the technologies that I've come across, what I do is I spend a lot of time looking for new technologies, and then I'll talk to the engineers and the folks at these companies and find out, okay, tell me about the underlying technology here and how does it actually work. But an easy one that I absolutely love these days that I found out about was Rufus and WorkHero. I mean, the Rufus Labs folks, I've been a fan of wearable technology for many years, And when Pro Glove came out a few years back, I'm like, this is great because
Mm.
now you can strap a product on your hand. You've got both hands. It's easy to use. But Rufus took that to the next level with Work Hero because in the background, it tracks what the team members are doing, and you can have them associated with different tasks and different teams. And the synergy, it integrates really well with the future of like a shelf to person system because someone will log into it and then they run the application that's native to that shelf to person system and they interface with that. But in the background, it's keeping track of what all the employees are doing. So you get dashboards and stuff. So Rufus is one that I'm just blown away by. And then kind of going back to item master
Mm.
dimensioning type of stuff, that foundational element sets you up for something that's, so there's another company out there, Pacurate, that has this software
Yeah.
that is like magic sauce. I mean, there are some things I didn't realize about all the different rules between FedEx and UPS and all the various carriers that are out there. And they've done an amazing job at being able to help break that down and optimize not only the cartonization of each item, but they have a software package that helps identify maybe the best 5 or 6 or 7 case sizes that a facility should be using based on their historical data. And that's great because, box on demand machines are fantastic. I love those where you kind of get the infinite size, but there's a cost associated with it. So it's real easy just to narrow it down to like your best 5 or 6 boxes and say, okay, and that might change in 4 or 5 or 6 months, and you can continuously evaluate.
Yeah. I think both of those solutions are great. Both previous guests on the podcast, and definitely a huge fan of Rufus and what they're doing over there. I had the same, like when I first learned about Rufus, I had the same impression as you. Like, it's a great form factor for a wearable, but the Work Hero, like you're essentially getting almost like an LMS like built in there, which I think is just great. And they just recently, yesterday, actually announced their AI component as well, which I think just takes it to the next level. So yeah, really interesting stuff there. And as we kind of look to the future as well, I know you mentioned humanoids early in our conversation, but what do you think is the future of automation? Maybe like what's hype? What's reality? What do you think the future of automation in warehousing really looks like?
It's hard to predict the future, but I think that as we continue to progress, we're gonna continue to see things become more and more flexible and more open communication between the different software packages, which is where things used to be really complicated in the past. It was you went with a particular software, WMS, whatever, and you were kind of stuck. And you were now that everybody's starting to play a lot nicer together. But as it progresses, one of the technologies I was just going to touch on as a standout is like the Dexterity AI folks, because what used to be a very, very complex type of technology to be able to automatically palletize or depalletize cases that took a lot of programming, a lot of hours, is now becoming more of an almost plug in and let it work type of situation. And then on the open source side of things, you've got companies like Mugen that are out there and they're saying, okay, look, we've got this software and we're going to allow people to use it to be able to use the robot to palletize and depalletize. But one of my favorite parts about advancement of technology is it really kind of goes back to what I've been working with like 15 years. And that's being able to take the environment of a facility and turn it into almost essentially a video game. I know you said that your son likes to play video games.
Yeah.
But to turn it into kind of a video game environment, and that way people can actually visualize what the changes are going to be. It's been my dream for many years to be able to put a 3D environment together and put a set of glasses on somebody called extended reality. And the C-level executives for a company would be able to see, okay, this is what the changes are going to look like. It helps with the change management for a facility because now they can actually see what it would look like. And you can train the operators and have better ergonomics because perhaps maybe what you were planning on doing for your pack out table doesn't have all the space that it needs. So between the next one over from it, or being able to reach the empty corrugate that you're going to use for your next box that you're going to be putting together. So to be able to kind of immerse in a more digital world in an easy way, I kind of see that as a breakdown of the barriers for moving into improvement, because it's scary to go out there and say, look, we've got an existing facility and how are we going to make changes to it? Because what are these changes going to impact? And so to be able to see that in a digital world, that's the future. I kind of see that's where things are going.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I guess you're referring to digital twin there in a sense, because I think that's pretty interesting technology, but I love the evolution there, like you said, of putting on the glasses and being able to see that and walk around and feel the space. I think that will take things even further without a doubt. So it looks like we have a question or a comment here. Tariq, you want to chime in?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, Thomas. You both guys are doing absolutely fantastic. So my question is that how we can use AI tool like ChatGPT, Copilot. These are the simplest tools which are available to us. So how can we use these AI tools to help us optimize the warehouse operation or any function in the warehouse?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Tariq. So the way that I see ChatGPT or Claude or Llama or any of these large language models is they're really a translator. They're giving us insight into the data in a way we haven't been able to do before. So you can actually ask it a question and it'll give you a response. I do like to refer to them though as an eager assistant or an eager intern, because if you ask ChatGPT to go do something, it's going to go do it. And with the response you get back from it may or may not be accurate. So if you're looking at it for optimizing the warehouse or optimizing your data, just insights into your sales data or your order data, it in of itself is a challenge to use. There's something that's a next level that's getting added to that more people are being aware of. And it's called RAG, or the Vector Embedded Database. And so what you get with RAG is you get your data in the background that the ChatGPT type of system, the large language model, will talk to, and it'll help retrieve accurate data. So those are things that are coming. Just using an LLM by itself, though, I think is a risky situation right now. But maybe by the end of the year, even there might be systems that are out there where you could just plug in your order data, you can plug in your slotting in your warehouse, and help optimize. NVIDIA has something called cuOpt that's out there that really helps optimize the path through the warehouse. And so that stuff's going to continue to evolve very, very quickly.
That problem I'm talking about, but when we put in something asked to ChatGPT, we are not sure about the data, what ChatGPT give to us or Copilot give to us. So that's the big challenge. Yeah.
And that's where using RAG can help ground it in truth. And so there's a team that I work with that does that type of stuff. They work a lot with vector embedded databases and things, which is where kind of background of me being able to talk to this comes from. But yes, it's there more. It's going to become more common to be able to use vector embedded databases in RAG so that you can trust the data that comes back out.
All right. Interesting. And thank you, Tariq, for the question here. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question around the AI there, Drew. I mean, I guess I'm curious in your thoughts around like something like with Rufus, what they announced yesterday with like their kind of ChatGPT style Work Hero extension on that side, or like Celaware with their Chat WMS. I mean, I find that those could be fairly useful for like the warehouse manager to really get some insights like on the fly. I mean, how do you feel about like those kind of extensions?
I haven't had a chance to dive into either one of them to see what the underlying tech is like, but that's where, if it's done appropriately, you're going to get good data back. There was one software company that I came across. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, where they were using the large language model to create SQL queries, which are, a program method to look into the data of a database where historically you've always had to have a database engineer do that work. And you're like, you can't bombard them with a bunch of stuff because there's only one or two people in an organization that can do it. But they developed an LLM that would create these queries for you. So it would be querying the real data. That may or may not be what Rufus and the others are doing in the background, or they may be using some version of a vector embedded database to actually start grounding it in truth, which that would be my hope that's what they're using. I actually haven't had a chance to look into that, but I love the announcement for sure. It was also entertaining as well, which Gabe usually is.
Yes. Yeah. They have a lot of fun over there, Rufus. So interesting stuff here with you, Drew, and definitely appreciate you coming on and joining us, and appreciate those tuning in as well here. I guess as we close it out, let me ask you, what is your number one top piece of advice that you give people when they're starting to think about automation?
Number one top piece of advice is to remember that there's a support system that has to be put in place for the automation. Just weekly look at, what's your networking like in your facility? What is the power like in the facility? Will you need compressed air for the automation? A lot of stuff I like to use tries to stay away from that. Other foundational things. Sometimes people overlook that there's the floor isn't flat enough for some of these systems, or that the fire suppression system needs to be upgraded. If you've packed a lot of plastic totes into a dense area, then don't forget that, that might change the fire requirement for that. So some of those foundational things for your building, don't overlook those. And then just kind of beyond that, like I said, foundational, have a good WMS and have an accurate item master. And then you can kind of go from there.
All right, great. And great tips there as well. I certainly run into some issues with fire regulations in the past on some projects and things unexpectedly. So there's definitely lots of things there to think about and make sure that you're aligning with before you start to drill holes in the floor or start to do any major investments, to be able to get yourself all around prepared and ready to go with those solutions. So Drew, really appreciate you joining me today and giving us some of these great insights. For people that are listening, if they want to get in touch with you, connect with you, what's the best way to get some more information about what you do and potentially ask you about how they can start to automate?
I would say probably the place that I'm the most active right now is on LinkedIn. So I try to respond to pretty much any messages that come out to me there, and you can find me there. But then our company website, Oneiro Technologies, is Oneiro, ONEIRO-TECH.com. And that primarily showcases like one of our most recent projects there. So the best way to learn more information, I would say, just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
All right, great. And thank you everyone for tuning in here today. So appreciate you joining me here today, Drew, and appreciate everyone for tuning in. Have a great rest of the day.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.